Well, it'll help avoid those who have access to dirt cheap energy avoid a recession. I don't know that it will help the UKs and the Germanys of the world right now. But in the US, for example, we're swimming in a sea of abundance of dirt cheap, very clean burning hydrocarbons. And again, I don't know why macroeconomists never take this into consideration when they make recession calls in the US, for example. It's been very clear to us, and we made the call early on, that this is not a recipe that bakes a recession. This is a recipe, especially when you factor in the fiscal spending that the U.S. is observing ahead of the upcoming election. I mean, I think all of Washington, D.C. is aligned, regardless of party, to do whatever they can to keep Donald Trump out of the White House. And if that means spending recklessly and having future generations pay that mortgage, they're going to do it. And so you have huge fiscal stimulus. You have interest payments going out to relatively wealthy investors, which is itself another form of stimulus. And you have the world's largest, most abundant supply of cheap hydrocarbons that has ever been known. Like the U.S. energy miracle is an understatement. And you know, we produce 20% of the world's oil and 30% of the world's natural gas, and we have so much of it, we don't know what to do with it. And the thing that amazes me, that macroeconomists are the first to say that if oil were to spike, we'd see a recession. Well, if you have access to the cheapest hydrocarbons in the world, why is that not bullish for GDP and economic activity? And it certainly is in the U.S. I find it funny that people can't see that. Like we have added 2.5 Saudi Arabias to the U.S. primary energy fleet since the shale revolution. That I've been to Saudi Arabia. The sidewalks are paved in gold. Like that, this is abundance. This is wealth, and it's going to find. And by the way, unlike Saudi Arabia, we have a relatively sophisticated, still forward integrated manufacturing sector ready to take advantage of it. And so, yeah, it's bullish for the economy to be swimming in cheap hydrocarbons. And if we made peace, I think we would see an economic boomlet.
On this episode of What the Finance podcast, I have the pleasure of welcoming back Doomberg, who's a regular guest. You've probably seen him before, the famous green chicken, who, really amazing insights into everything happening in energy and in the world in general. So, Doomberg, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast today.
And Anthony, great to be back. I think this might be my 5th appearance on your show, if I have counted that correctly. I always enjoy it, and looking forward to another fantastic discussion today.
Yeah, it is. You're you've had the most appearances on the show of anyone, so congratulations. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but
one of my most cherished accomplishments, Anthony. It must be said.
Yeah, exactly. I'll send out the trophy out later today, but no, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it. So yeah, we've had a really interesting, I guess, period over the past few weeks. Lots of geopolitical risks, globally, not just lots of people look at the Middle East, lots of people looking at Europe, but also, the Americas, South America, Venezuela threatening Guyana. So there's been lots of risks circling at the moment. So I guess from your perspective, what does this all mean?
Yeah, that if we had to choose one word for the first 4 months of 2024, it would be geopolitical. The geopolitics is dominating market action, at least in certain key markets that we follow very closely. I do think that we are taking significant risks in the West with geopolitics. I think the recent rather bizarre dance between Israel and Iran and the way that is being portrayed in the various media markets around the world has been fascinating for us to observe. Sometimes proxies don't do what you want them to do, and I think the U.S. is perhaps learning that both in Ukraine and in the Middle East. It is an extraordinarily dangerous time. We're playing with fire, and we find the entire manner in which we arrived at this situation to be rather baffling. It's truly scary, I guess is the word to use. It's just incredible to watch, and the most interesting aspect of it is how little attention the risks we're taking is garnering in the West compared to, say, Europe and Middle East and sort of foreign newspapers that we can get translations of. Here it's a giant nothing burger. And yet to the rest of the world, it feels like we're on the brink of World War III. And it's just really amazing to watch. So yeah, that would be the thing that has occupied most of our time so far this year.
That's interesting because I see it from a UK perspective, and yes, definitely hear a lot about it. But so in the US, not much at all.
I mean, if you're on cable news where they're always, breaking news and fiery red backgrounds, but then people have become deadened to that. But in the common day-to-day periodicals, it gets, some attention, but nowhere near what we think it should. I mean, we just had a series of ballistic missile and drone strikes between Israel and Iran while we're in the middle of a proxy direct kinetic war with Russia and pondering whether we might not want to get into one with China over Taiwan. I don't, we are about to record our monthly Doom Zoom for April for our Pro Tier subscribers, and the title is Geopolitics and War, Sleepwalking into the Abyss. What are we doing? Could we at least have a congressional debate about the matter, about whether we should be declaring war on nuclear superpowers? We've done everything except the formal declaration. I can tell you that the other side of these strikes perceives themselves to be basically at war with the U.S. It's amazing how we got here.
How did we get here? Because you said it before, we're sort of sleepwalking into it.
Well, I mean, the piece that we have not yet recorded, but the first draft of the slides is done. I think there's two main issues. One is we underestimate our geopolitical foes. The U.S. is still, of course, a global superpower and perhaps still the strongest military in the world. But we have a lot of bloat. We have a lot of waste. We've outsourced an enormous amount of our manufacturing sector. If it weren't for the energy miracle and the shale patch, the U.S. would be in a far worse position. And the current suite of leaders in Washington, D.C. basically did everything they could to try to stop that. And so I think there's step one is we underestimate our geopolitical foes. And step two is we overestimate our own capabilities. I think it's pretty clear 2 years in that the war in Ukraine is not going as planned, that picking or helping Ukraine when they're so close to Russia and our supply chains are so far away and outsourced, as I referenced earlier, was probably not the wisest move. I think we're now beginning to learn that it's okay to say that we were almost able to achieve peace in the early days of the war and it was scuttled for whatever reason. And 2 years on, the peace that will eventually prevail, because it has to, will be much worse than that deal that was on the table 2 years ago, both for Ukraine, mostly for Ukraine, but also for the West. And then the third is we sort of underestimate the consequences of war. What we did in Afghanistan and Iraq and Libya and Syria, like it feels far away, but to those people it's very real. And it seems like we're, in this escalatory spiral. Now, again, it looks like Iran and Israel were embarking in a fair bit of theater this week. But if that theater had gone wrong, I mean, you're taking enormous risk. Like missiles are being shot near, nuclear research centers from, what are we doing? Like, how did we get here? And how do we take a beat and discuss as a country and as a series of allies whether this might be the wisest course of action? It's very befuddling. I don't have an answer to it. And again, geopolitics and military strategy is certainly things we're interested in, we write about, but it's not our core expertise. But it seems baffling to me that we're just sleepwalking into the abyss.
It's amazing to think that a good scenario is 400 rockets and drones being fired at Israel. It's like what everyone was thinking. It's like, wait,
relief rally, I mean,
Yeah.
what are we doing? Like, can we just take a second? Like the UK is no longer the global empire that it used to be. Why are we still behaving that way? Why does Lord Cameron think that when he requests audiences with various legitimate powers, that he will be received as a peer? Like China is vastly more powerful than the UK today. Some would argue that China is at least as powerful as the US today. In the presentation, again, which is not yet published, we have a slide which has a bit of a cheeky title, like China is the new arsenal of democracy, because the democracies have outsourced much of their military industrial complex to China. Do we think if we get into a war with the Chinese that they'll continue to supply arms or the key components of those arms that will then be turned around and used against them? That's not how this works. Like, I must be missing something. That's what we keep telling ourselves. Like, what are we missing? There must be some key piece of the puzzle that we're missing. But I don't think we are. Because the same people who are the architects of disastrous energy policies, which are plainly and predictably guaranteed to fail, are the same people that were the architects of the sanctions policies, which we wrote about very early on, that they would backfire, not just fail, but backfire. And they have. And it occurred to us a few months ago that those same architects of the energy and sanctions policies are writing the military strategy. And why would we think that just because we don't know as much about that vector, that they would be somehow more capable over there? And frankly, our perusal of the international affairs in the past 3 or 4 months has been rather frightening, is the word I would use. Like we are sleepwalking our way into the abyss. It's truly mind-boggling.
It does seem to have been. It's sort of like I don't know how you'd say it. It's almost like, oh, we're good, you're bad. We have to do whatever we can to stop you. But rather than, I feel like there was a pragmatic approach previously.
And let's be clear, like the empirical evidence of who's good and who isn't is let's just say it's cloudy. I mean, it's not like we have the most pristine track record of leaving behind utopian democracies after wars that we've gotten involved in. And that is, I think, sort of a bit understated. I mean, I'd be very curious to hear from you. Like, what does the UK press think? Like, do people in the UK know that China is like vastly more powerful than them? I was very interested to see how Xi Jinping treated Olaf Scholz when he arrived in China. Like we're acting as though we're the king of the hill. And I mean, I think the word of 2024 for the second half of the year ought to be a little humility. Like I don't know. I'm legitimately, Anthony, I'm at a loss for words.
Yeah, I think from the UK perspective, but I feel like this is a global phenomenon where everything that happens, everyone blames their own politicians, or everyone will, they don't look at things from a global perspective. They look at it very insular. So say inflation, prices have gone up. It's our politicians' fault, probably. But also it's this massive global complex sphere of things that are actually influencing it. So sometimes, I don't know if that's the same in the US, people just look at it from a US perspective rather than from, trying to interlink all the dots together.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So what does this mean for energy?
Sorry,
it's not a laughing matter, but
no. I mean, I think there's always the question of what does this mean for markets, and that's the business we're in. I think if you look across the primary energy complex today, you will see that it is either oversupplied or well supplied. And one of the primary energy inputs is trading at substantially elevated prices, correcting for energy content compared to the others, and that is oil. So natural gas and coal are trading at well supplied to oversupplied type price levels, whereas oil is still trading in the mid 80s, low 90s for Brent as recently as a couple of days ago. Our view is in the absence of these two wars, which is what they are, there are two wars, one in the heartbed of a major energy ecosystem in the Middle East, and the other tangling with one of the most important energy net exporters in the world and a nuclear superpower. If it weren't for those two wars, I think oil would be trading for sub $50. We arrive at that price by inspecting the landed LNG costs in Europe and multiplying by some factor of like 5.6, basically, which corrects for energy content. And at roughly $10 a million BTU landed LNG in Europe, that's roughly a $55 to $60 oil price. And since oil is the least you use, so in that range, I think there's a geopolitical risk premium embedded in the price of oil that, comparing it to the energy corrected landed cost of LNG, gives you some insight into, and whether that's expanding or contracting gives you a rough read on where the markets are heading. And so, like what we saw just overnight, for example, when it looked like Israel had made a serious counterstrike against Iran for Iran's largely symbolic strike against Israel. Oil spiked, right? And then as it became clear that perhaps this might be the end, then we saw oil, drop several percent from the overnight highs. And so the jaws of arbitrage between natural gas, which is less impacted by what's going on in the Middle East, at least by the market's current view, those jaws sort of tighten up a little bit today during the day as prices normalized and oil came back in, and some of that risk premium has been taken out. These types of sort of market indicators for geopolitical events are very temporary, by the way. I mean, I think the market has decided, for example, one of the most interesting observations in the market is gold is reacting as a risk off flight to safety, whereas Bitcoin hasn't been. So when gold spikes into these headlines, we've seen Bitcoin collapse into these headlines, which is a fascinating observation for which I don't have much in the way of an explanation for, but it's just interesting to observe. We enjoy observing market reactions to these types of headlines, and for a while, they can be pretty instructive as to how the market is pricing the risk aspects of certain geopolitical events. So what we've observed is oil higher, gold higher, Bitcoin lower, if it looks like World War III is imminent. And when headlines cross the screen that indicate that World War III perhaps has been postponed, then we see the reverse price action.
Okay, that's interesting. So you mentioned there that if there was no war, oil would be what, $55 or so. Looking at the current TTF price, is that? I'm assuming if there was no war, then there'd also be a lot more pipeline gas going to Europe as well. So could it potentially even be lower than what we're currently seeing?
Yeah, I mean, we are in a relatively oversupplied situation. Look, natural gas in the Permian Basin today is trading for minus $2. I looked at earlier this week. Like they're paying people $2 per million BTU to take away natural gas because there's just so much of it. I'll look up the exact numbers as we're talking here, but natural gas across the entirety of North America, spot prices are ranging between negative prices in Waha and maybe $1.60, $1.70. Prices in Alberta and Canada are even cheaper. The Alberta hub is at 98 cents a million BTU. It's just really incredibly cheap hydrocarbons. Look, 98 cents per million BTU is $6 a barrel oil. Like that's like the cheapest, most plentiful source of clean burning hydrocarbon energy the world has ever seen. In the absence of geopolitical risk, oil has no business trading in the 80s. Like Waha Hub right now, spot price at the Waha Hub in Texas in the Permian Basin is minus $1.26. I think it minimized out at minus $4 a million BTU earlier this week. Now, of course, these are just spot prices. These are very volatile, but still, as an indicator of energy prices, yeah, on the 15th of April, spot price for natural gas in the Permian Basin was minus $3.54 per million BTU, if you can believe it. And by the way, natural gas is very valuable. We use it to make fertilizer. We use it to heat homes. We use it to produce electricity. Many, many heavy industries rely on it as a key input. We believe the tsunami of dirt cheap natural gas to be had in North America is one of the primary reasons why the U.S. will avoid a recession ahead of the upcoming election. And we made that call early, and I think it will prove prescient. And eventually, as we wrote recently, people will begin to switch their engines, and you'll see more and more long-haul trucks being run on compressed natural gas, and more mining tractors and dump trucks being run on compressed natural gas, and mobile power plants inserting themselves into the various shale fields in order to power the extraction of the energy using natural gas as opposed to diesel. With diesel at $4 a gallon and natural gas free, it won't be long before people switch engines in order to do the same work for much lower variable costs. And so this will all find its equilibrium at some point, but it is truly a remarkable time. We have this contrast. So again, to your question, what would oil be if we had peace with Russia and the land pipelines flowed freely and it was announced that Nord Stream would be repaired and we had peace in the Middle East? Yeah, I mean, oil would be $30, $25 a barrel. And by the way, on an inflation adjusted basis, correcting for like 1983 or 1984 in government inflation data that Bloomberg uses for its inflation adjustment factors, is $10 oil. In a peace world. Now we're not in a peace world. We're in a world on the cusp of World War III, and so it makes sense that oil is trading where it is because it would be the primary fuel that would be impacted. Although on our radar of things to worry about is Qatar, and the natural gas, the Ras Laffan industrial site in Qatar is responsible for a huge amount of LNG export capacity, and if somebody were to fire some missiles into that site, things could get pretty hairy for natural gas as well, at least on the LNG export markets.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's quite interesting because I've been hearing that it's actually quite a tight market, I guess, globally, maybe. So, say if there were any issues, then potentially globally there might be a bit of a gap in supply. Is that correct?
Tight market for what? Gas or oil?
LNG and I guess that's more in the near term. Or
we
is
have
that no?
we have a glut of LNG now. That's why TTF is $9 a million BTU, down from 100, an intraday high of 100 during the apex of the crisis, and more to come. But the interesting phenomenon, of course, is geopolitics is driving the glut of natural gas in the U.S. because much natural gas in the U.S. is produced as a byproduct of oil in the Permian Basin, and that's where the prices have gone negative because they're swamping pipeline offtake capacity. But they're motivated to keep producing oil because oil is in the $80 a barrel type price range. Ironically, the cure for low natural gas prices in the US is a lower global oil price, which would then cause these co-producers, these producers of associated gas and other light hydrocarbons to dial back their drilling because the profitability of doing so will be diminished. So this unique geopolitical risk premium embedded in the international oil prices is deeply bearish for North American natural gas, both in Canada and in the US. And as we've written, one of the biggest beneficiaries of all of this is Mexico, who has ample land pipelines into the Permian and is quickly building out manufacturing and electricity producing capacity to absorb as much of this basically free dirt cheap hydrocarbons they can get their hands on.
Yeah, and Canada's not looking to take advantage of what they have, so then that's provides more opportunities for.
Yeah, Trudeau doesn't see a business case for LNG exports at these prices. So.
Yeah. Hey everyone, sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to extend a massive thank you to you for listening and tuning in and for your support over these 3 years. So we've had, hundreds of guests that we've welcomed on the podcast. We've had millions of views with hundreds of thousands of different people listening in. So I just wanted to thank you. You know, I started this as a student. I'm now currently working and I've always done this on the side just because I have a passion for it and I've enjoyed it. And probably similar to yourself, you listen to all these, different YouTube channels and podcasts of people listening to different guests. That's how I started, and I just wanted to sort of take the plunge and be able to have the opportunity to speak to these people, and you've made that happen. So thank you very much. Just myself, don't make any money from this, and it's really a passion project. So thanks for supporting that passion of mine. If you wanted to support the channel, all I ask is if you could like, subscribe, or even comment, positive or negative feedback. I'm always willing to take constructive criticism. I'd really appreciate that. But otherwise, thanks so much. If you can believe it, only 14% of our listeners actually subscribe to the podcast. So yeah, if you can, great. If not, no problem at all. Thanks for listening. And yep, let's get back to the show. Interesting to see. Okay. So quite, not very tight at the moment, and then I guess there's lots of supply coming on as well, as you said, in Qatar and other, Canada and other places actually in the next few years. So do you think prices could go lower for LNG specifically?
Well, I think they will eventually equilibrate. In the long run, coal, oil, and natural gas will trade for roughly the same price, corrected for energy and logistics. And so there's a band of logistics that's wider for natural gas than it is for oil, than oil is for coal. Coal is the easiest thing to ship around. It's a solid, put it on a very rudimentary boat, and off you go. Liquid's a little more challenging, and then gas very challenging. So there will be a wider spread for natural gas than oil and coal. But in the long run, things that do the same thing can't sell for different prices indefinitely. And we will change the engines because all of these things are burned to produce heat to do work. And those who are the recipients of the work are relatively agnostic to the fuel source. And so there's money to be made in facilitating the closure of that arbitrage, which is something that we've been profiling in a couple of our pieces. And it's good to have that kind of like a clear-cut jaws of arbitrage to be the tailwinds into your sales if you're going to make a private business decision, for example. So any company that is providing end users the opportunity to burn natural gas to do the same work that they're currently burning diesel to do is going to make a lot of money with this spread until the spread closes. But in the end, what will happen when it's all done is we will have a far more efficient and flexible market for these primary fossil fuels. And so the equilibrium, what must eventually happen, band of prices is very clear. The key questions are, which way do the jaws close, and how long will it take, and what are the costs of facilitating that closure? And that's, the economy can be modeled as a giant, deflation machine. It eventually takes expensive things and makes them cheaper, and makes takes cheaper things and makes them more expensive, especially if they can both do the same work.
Yeah, and it seems like at these prices, sort of China and India are starting to come into the market a little bit more. So that could be, as you said, it's competing with coal currently for or getting to that level at least for from a value perspective.
Yeah, and even hydrocarbon, the rain levels in Sichuan impact coal prices in Appalachia, right? The market for primary energy is relatively interconnected and highly inelastic. And so shortages or gluts in one of the primary energies eventually finds their way into the others. And by the way, during times of glut, the jaws of arbitrage tend to close down. And during times of shortages, the jaws of arbitrage tend to close up. And right now, there's an arbitrage, gaping wide arbitrage between the price of oil and the price of landed LNG. And we believe that has to close down. So we would be cautious oil. Of course, one geopolitical catastrophe away from a 30, 40, 50, $100 spike in the price of oil. So, I mean, it's not like you should go and sell calls against the price of oil or some kind of a winner-make-a trade like that. But broadly speaking, all things being equal, correcting for geopolitical black swan events, when you have a glut of energy, which we kind of do today, both coal and natural gas in particular are very well supplied, price anomalies tend to close in the downward direction.
It's actually my next question. Where does this all go if we see a sort of World War III? And I guess, you could even say a bifurcation of the global economy between East and West.
Yeah, well, I would view World War III as sort of a economic singularity through which you cannot see or predict what comes on the other side of it. In a regular singularity, if that isn't an oxymoronic phrase, the laws of physics break down at that point source in the middle, and it really does you no good to try to model what happens on the other end of it. And I would say if we truly have a tactical exchange of nuclear weapons between the U.S. and Russia, or the U.S. and China, or Iran and Israel, all bets are off. Nobody who, well, first of all, you shouldn't really care what happens to the economy in that circumstance, but anybody who thinks they know how that chaotic series of tit for tat exchanges would ultimately end is deluding themselves. Our strong preference is we don't run that experiment.
Okay, no, that makes sense. But it seems like what we've talked about, especially if crude continues to come down as geopolitical risks sort of soften, good for the economy. It means that there's going to be low energy prices moving forward. So is that going to help, I guess, the world avoiding the recession?
Well, it'll help avoid those who have access to dirt cheap energy avoid a recession. I don't know that it will help the UKs and the Germanys of the world right now. But in the US, for example, we're swimming in a sea of abundance of dirt cheap, very clean burning hydrocarbons. And again, I don't know why macroeconomists never take this into consideration when they make recession calls in the US, for example. It's been very clear to us, and we made the call early on, that this is not a recipe that bakes a recession. This is a recipe, especially when you factor in the fiscal spending that the U.S. is observing ahead of the upcoming election. I mean, I think all of Washington, D.C. is aligned, regardless of party, to do whatever they can to keep Donald Trump out of the White House. And if that means spending recklessly and having future generations pay that mortgage, they're going to do it. And so you have huge fiscal stimulus. You have interest payments going out to relatively wealthy investors, which is itself another form of stimulus. And you have the world's largest, most abundant supply of cheap hydrocarbons that has ever been known. Like the U.S. energy miracle is miracle is an understatement. And we produce 20% of the world's oil and 30% of the world's natural gas, and we have so much of it we don't know what to do with it. And the thing that amazes me, that macroeconomists are the first to say that if oil were to spike, we'd see a recession. Well, if you have access to the cheapest hydrocarbons in the world, why is that not bullish for GDP and economic activity? And it certainly is in the U.S. I find it funny that people can't see that. Like we've added 2.5 Saudi Arabias to the U.S. primary energy fleet since the shale revolution. That I've been to Saudi Arabia. The sidewalks are paved in gold. Like that. This is abundance. This is wealth, and it's going to find. And by the way, unlike Saudi Arabia, we have a relatively sophisticated, still forward integrated manufacturing sector ready to take advantage of it. And so, yeah, it's bullish for the economy to be swimming in cheap hydrocarbons. And if we made peace, I think we would see an economic boomlet.
Yeah, and despite the chest bashing in Washington, they're pumping the oil, pumping the gas, and not slowing down there.
Yeah, we still got 90 nuclear reactors or whatever it is, and Lord knows we've installed far too much renewable energy for our liking, but it's there and it's installed and it's the capital has been expended. And we're seeing, I think, a pretty resilient economy over here, much to the surprise of some people who were anticipating a recession.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk recently about the impact that AI, clouds, computing, and blockchain will have on sort of electricity needs moving forward into the future. Do you see that as a potential risk that there's going to be a very high demand, or do you think there's plenty?
I think having had a fair bit of firsthand experience with AI tools, as we've explored them, because we view them as inevitable, they're extremely powerful, really revolutionary. Akin to the first time we used Internet Explorers, back in the day, or played with an iPhone. So I don't think it's hyperbole to say that this is a transformative technological revolution that we're observing and participating in. And it will require an enormous amount of power. And we have written several months ago that we believe that the need to power data centers would be the thing that enables nuclear power to facilitate its renaissance. And I think we're beginning to see that play out. Now, the AI is certainly a bubble. There's all manner of undeserving but wildly valued companies that have latched on to the AI mania. And this is what we see all the time. The big question for investors is, when the inevitable popping of this temporary bubble occurs, who are the winners that are still there and selling for depressed prices that you'd want to buy and hold for the next 20 years, right? Like almost cliche, of course, but Amazon and Microsoft back in the day after the dot-com bubble. I mean, there's going to be winners and mostly losers, and a lot of people who lose a lot of money. But the underlying impact on energy, I think, is pronounced and real and represents a real challenge to the whole concept, for example, of a public grid. I think we're going to see a boom in private grids where you build your local SMR dedicated to the suite of data centers you'll build in a small area. I think we're going to see a very modular gridlets pop up all across the U.S. As the technology companies simply won't be denied in their quest to continue climbing up that Kurzweilian singularity curve of exponential growth in computing power.
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, you can see it happening a lot around the Permian, where there's extremely ridiculously cheap energy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And we're seeing data centers pop up next to nuclear power plants and deals being cut in that regard. It was very fascinating to see Amazon's entry into the space, which is kind of a bellwether company. So yeah, I think this is the future. A bit of a distributed series of grids customized for the bespoke needs of data center developers. Because if we just keep tacking on these data centers to the existing grid, we're going to crash. We're going to crash it. We don't know how to build large infrastructure projects anymore.
Yeah, we require trillions of dollars of upgrades to the grid.
And endless environmental lawsuits that are intolerable to the. There's going to be a civil war on what's sort of the progressive environmental left. Big tech is kind of viewed as lefty, and then the environmentalists, and big tech will win because they're more powerful. And I do believe one helpful way to model the human endeavor is to assume that we will arrange our economy or rearrange our economy in order to stay on that Kurzweilian exponential growth in computing power chart that is so famous from his book, The Singularity is Near. And having that as a mental model has proved very useful for the past 25 years, and I don't know why it won't continue to be for the next 10.
Yeah, great insights to Doomberg. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Last question is, what is one message you want people to take away from our conversation?
Boy, one message from our conversation. It would be helpful if we perhaps indulged in a bit of humility over here in the West, and pondered whether our posture is commensurate with our power, um, as the rest of the world climbs Maslow's hierarchy of needs and wishes to exploit the undeniable human endeavor of increasing standards of living and so on. And there's plenty of room on the planet for everybody. And I think we're living in an old sort of colonialistic mindset when we should view the emerging new superpowers of the world as peers and not necessarily geopolitical enemies.
Yeah, great. It's not a winner take all world. There's
Yeah,
everyone can win.
it doesn't need to be,
Mm,
but it seems like we're headed that way.
yeah, definitely. Yep, Doomberg, thanks again. So if anyone wanted to find out more about your work, we see doomberg.com there. Is that the best place to find what you
Yeah,
do?
we were talking before we hit record that we've ejected a squatter from Doomberg.com, and now we're the proud owners of that domain. It's still the Doomberg Substack, but now we have our own domain name for people to find us more easily. And so if you head over to Doomberg.com, you can see everything that we do, our newsletter, our podcast appearances like this one will be up there, our Doomberg Pro tier, which is a fun additional product that we offer. And we got a few other products in the works. Stay tuned, but we're doing a few things with the Doomberg brand, and it's really, truly fun, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you, Anthony, and looking forward to making it a half dozen.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully, we're still here in 6 months with all this geopolitical stuff. But well, yeah, I really enjoy everything that you do. So thanks for keeping it coming. And yeah, I'm looking forward to see what you guys do in the future. So thanks again.
Thanks, Anthony. Great to be with you again.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening. I really appreciate the support. If you've got value out of this, I'd really appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, or comment. You know, good or bad feedback. I'm always open to that. But it really helps with the channel. As I said before, only about 14% of people actually subscribe to this channel. So if you were to that, it would really help. It could mean we could continue to grow. If not, thanks for watching, and see you on the next show. And you also might like this video right here. All right, thanks again.